All right, today we're going to talk about Ruth chapter 1. And last week we really dove a lot into the context of the book of Ruth. What was the setting? It was during the time of the judges, and it was also, they were in the land of Moab, whereas they were once in the land of Bethlehem. So today we're going to kind of dive into that a little deeper, and we're going to talk about what happens in the first chapter. And hopefully we can give a little more context rather than just reading it all out. We're going to try and give a little more of an understanding of this chapter. So we know that after they went to Moab, they married two Moabite women. The two sons of Naomi and her husband, they married two Moabite women, which they weren't necessarily supposed to do, right? So they married them, and they don't have any children, unfortunately. And the husband of Naomi dies, and then the two sons of Naomi die. So Naomi's pretty upset by this point, because she comes to Moab thinking that she was going to get away from all the famine, all the suffering that was going on in Israel, and then she ends up having more suffering than she had before. So she's upset, but she's also upset with God. And she's about to go back to Israel because she found out that the famine is done and she has land back in Israel. So she's going back to Israel, back to her people, because her husband and her sons are dead. And her two daughter-in-laws are like, yeah, we'll go with you, because they were both very loyal. And again, if you remember my video last time, it gives us a complete twist, a complete turnaround on what we would have thought. We would have thought that the Israelites would have been the one faithful and with noble character, but it seemed as though it was these Moabites who had the noble character. They were the ones who were loyal to their mother-in-law and were willing to follow them. And when Naomi says, no, don't follow me, they argue with her. They say, no, we want to. And Naomi, she's like, what am I supposed to do? Even if I was able to find another husband and I was able to have another child by some miracle, are you really going to wait long enough for that child to grow old enough for you to marry them so that they can take care of you? Like, it just doesn't make sense. There's nothing for you with me. Go home. And Orpah, one of the daughter-in-laws, she's just crying because she loves her mother-in-law. She's loyal to her. But then she does listen because she's obedient as well. And she listens and she goes home just like her mother-in-law said. But Ruth refuses. She clings to her and says, no, where you go, I'm going to go. Your God will become my God. And if you remember, I think it's in verse 13, it says, would you tarry for them till it was talking about if she was able to have children, if Naomi was able to have children and they were able to grow old enough for Ruth and the other sister-in-law to marry. She says, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Like, would you wait for them to get old enough to marry? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. So it seems as though Naomi is blaming God for what's going on. He says, it's because of God's hand. God's hand is away from me. God's not blessing me anymore. God's against me right now. And you guys are suffering as a result of it. So she says, just go away. Go home. Go back to your people where you can be taken care of. Maybe you can remarry or something like that. So she's just telling them, just go home. Go home to your families. But Ruth, of course, is refusing. And this God who Naomi was just blaming for all the problems, saying, God is against me. This is happening because God is against me. Now Ruth is saying, your God will become my God. It says, where you go, I'm going to go. So we see this huge difference between the Israelite who isn't trusting God, who isn't faithful to God, who's blaming God for everything, and this Moabite who was supposedly supposed to be pagan, was supposed to be following these other gods. She's being more faithful to the God of Israel and being more loyal to God's people than Naomi is. So she says, I want to go with you. And she's like, yeah, fine, you can come with me. And again, we shouldn't blame Orpah, which was the other daughter-in-law, for leaving, because that's what Naomi told her to do. She was just obeying. So again, that's another strong characteristic of this Moabite woman who was obeying her mother-in-law, even though she disagreed with her mother-in-law. She said, I want to go with you. And she said, no. So we shouldn't blame her for what she did. Ruth just was a little more stubborn. And of course, Ruth said, entreat me now not to leave thee, or return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, will I die. There will I be buried, and the Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. So she's saying, I'm going to be with you till I die, right? When she said this, she was steadfastly minded, and okay, so she's going. And then it says in verse 19, it says, so the two went unto the time, and they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem that all the city was moved about them and said, "Is this Naomi?" Because remember, Naomi was from Bethlehem. And she's returning home, and she has land there and stuff like that. And she said unto them, "Call me not Naomi," which, by the way, means pleasant in Hebrew. "Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me?" Okay, that's a lot right there. So she's returning home. People are happy to see her, like, "Is this Naomi?" And she's like, "Why call me Naomi?" Which means pleasant. She's like, "Call me bitterness. Call me Mara, because God has afflicted me. God has punished me. I went out full, and God has brought me back empty. God has been against me." And we look at this, and we're thinking, what? God wasn't against you. You left God. God said to stay in Israel. He told the people, "Don't leave Israel. This is where I'm going to bless you." The people of Israel likely being punished by God because of their sinfulness, because of their unfaithfulness, but then that doesn't justify them leaving Israel and going to another place where God said not to go. And now she's upset with God because God didn't bless her. She said, "Oh, I disobeyed God and I was full," right? Yeah, that's how I look at it. She's saying, "Oh, when I was disobeying God and I went to Moab, I was full of things. Like I had my husband, I had my children, I had my wealth, but now God has brought me back empty," right? Well, maybe because you disobeyed him, maybe because you weren't in the place where he said he was going to bless you. But the point was, we can see that Naomi is at a pretty bad spot in her life. She's saying, "Don't call me happy, don't call me pleasant, call me bitterness, because that's what I am." And anyways, it gives us a little more of a context in the next verse. So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned to the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. So we already get a little bit of a context for the rest of the story, because, of course, if you know the story of Ruth, Ruth goes off gleaning in the fields, and this is during the harvest season, so that gives us a little bit of a context there. So, again, we can see that the story seems to be revolving around Naomi, not necessarily Ruth. Naomi seems to be the one whose character needs to develop, not Ruth. Ruth seems like she's fine. She's the one following God. She's the one saying, "Your God will be my God," stuff like that. So let's continue this next week.
Hey everyone! If you liked the video, then feel free to click the like button. If you want to see more content like this one, then we recommend clicking subscribe and hitting the bell so that you can be notified anytime a video is uploaded or live streamed. Thank you!